Video games are the forefront of the entertainment industry. Games encompass nearly every form of modern art within its design. Drama, acting, graphic art, and of course music. All of these are beautifully mixed together to create an interactive world for you. Video games were created in the late 50s and were designed to input series of codes together that would cause actions in a computer. Much like in a way when you press the A button on controllers today, it sends out code to the console, and in most games, you would jump. Fast forward to the 70s, and we see video games move away from tools of developmental science and push towards pure entertainment. Here we see the very beginning of video game music, which is actually just blip sound effects.
Video games are the latest craze to sweep the country and most of the world, too. Millions of people are addicted to hours of gazing at electronic images on game screens in arcades and in their own homes. What makes video games so popular? Well, we search for an answer as we begin a special series on Video Fever, games people play.
As video games gripped the people, developers began popping up around the world. This would lead to a flood of new games, but most people couldn't afford everything that went into playing video games at home. And the ones who didn't have the ability to play them all. This helped into the creation of the arcade. When arcades were big on the scene, the owners needed ways to attract more customers. This is where we really see video game music take a turn in popularity. The games were so popular that when people walking down the street heard the sounds of their favorite games, they were inclined to go in and play them. Due to the high success of video games, we start seeing some of our favorite game developers such as Namco, Konami, and even Nintendo make the scene. And with big companies like these, we see a demand for home consoles and full-length games with story and depth. Composers for these games now had to create music that would go along with characters, themes, stories, and even the credits. When consumers were buying standalone soundtracks to films, game companies saw the possibility for more business, and composers for film saw new opportunities in video games. In the 90s, we see an explosion in not only games and consoles, but the music scores grew exponentially, almost to film score quality. With MIDI tracks available and the ability to mix MIDI with live players, we see video games take on fully orchestrated music. A great example is from Final Fantasy VIII, which released in 1999, and Nobuo Uematsu's piece for the game, Library for Home. In the turn of the century, video game music was the size of blockbuster film music. Large video game companies such as Bungie Studios had their own music team of composers, arrangers, and even their own ensembles. Here we see bits of a recording session.
Short answer is yes. Would you like a longer answer?
No, we got plenty of questions to go through.
Yes, when I have the time.
Right on.
Yeah, I kind of rarely, I wouldn't say rarely, I don't have nearly enough time to play as I used to, but I would say I used to be a very avid video game player, and I try to squeeze it in whenever possible nowadays.
Oh yeah, I play video games for fun, because I have to, just because. The more video games, the better.
So far, up until a very recent project for me, I was just writing for like concert stuff or just my own personal sketches that I never intended to see the light of day. And for a lot of that stuff, it was kind of a balance between form and not as much pre-planning as someone might think. Mostly writing by ear, more or less, which is weird to explain. You think playing by ear, but writing by ear, it's a very slow form of improvisation. Basically is how I feel. But yeah, and then for the Frankie's Flights of Fancy that I did for the Woo Theater, that was that soundtrack. I basically it was a lot of back and forth with the director and being involved in rehearsals and in the pre-production of the writing of the show itself. And that was very important just to get an idea so I could throw sketches out as we went and see if they stuck or not and get feedback on it even if I didn't finish the track to what I thought it should be, and then incorporate all that feedback, interpret it however I need to, because most of them were not musicians, and so that was that's a big part of it too, because you're not always working with musicians.
Well, if it's just for my pleasure, it's usually kind of one or two things. Like, I will sit down at the piano and I will kind of just jam out something, and something will feel right, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool, and then I'll just kind of extrapolate on that. Usually those compositions take like forever to finish, because it's kind of like, oh, there's no pressure to do this right now, sort of thing. Other times I have a very specific idea or theme in mind. I don't necessarily have the music, but whenever I start out with a theme or like an image, it usually always goes a little better, just because there's kind of like a narrative that controls where it goes. It's not just like, oh, I can take this wherever I want it to. It's like, no, I actually have to see this theme through, or I have to see this story through, or I have to paint this image accurately with music. So it's usually one of those two ways.
Well, whether it's video games or whether it's not, you always pick a kind of center topic, and you build around like a leitmotif or something. So you develop that way, and much like John Williams, you can keep playing off the same idea over and over again.
So I've actually done this for a few bids that I didn't actually land, but I've gotten decently far in a couple interview processes with just small like indie companies, and what they ask for and what I ask for tend to be the same thing most of the time. Basically, I just like to know up front as much as they can tell me obviously about the project, but you know, anything that can give me a hint of like what the pacing might be, you know, for like if it was like you know, like a long form, like a role playing game or something, you would approach that way differently. You know, no matter how much music you're going to end up writing, you would approach the pacing of it differently and the mood differently than you would like, you know, like a Twitch-based shooter or something, or like a
Sure.
you know, something you just jump into and jump back out. So, in which case you need to draw on whatever resources you feel would fit that. But if there's like just a general mood, the genre, what they think the music should sound like is very important.
Yeah.
Just seeing how they even communicate those ideas to me says a lot. You know, if they and not to say that would, you know, that I would not be interested in the project if they can't, you know, convince me of something.
Right.
But it definitely would make it easier, and I've got a lot of positive feedback that way when I would say, you know, give me an example scene or an example overview of something, and then I would come back with that information, and I would, you know, maybe write a sample track. I'll just take a day and just write like a couple minutes of something, and then send it back to them, and they'll say, no, not so much. That doesn't sound anything like it, or that's exactly what I want. And I've gotten both responses without actually landing the gigs. I don't know how that worked out, but yeah. So that's what I like.
I mean, first and foremost, you kind of have to get your hands on the game and actually play it and see how it actually plays out, because there are going to be vast difference between like Halo and Minecraft, let's say. After that, you get in and you talk with the directors and the developers and see where they were wanting to go with it.
I would lean kind of towards fantasy and sci-fi. So, sometimes they're both blended together, but those are genres where you see a lot of orchestral work, which I like, or a blend of that, some hybrid type things, and both of those can definitely dig into those musical styles. But just those are the types of games I like to play anyway.
I do like horror just because I like sound design a lot, you know, and sound design and composition. I mean, they're kind of married, but at the same time, they're very separate things. I sort of like the horror genre just because it's actually a lot more sound design than it is like orchestration and composition. Because you have to create all these crazy sounds and have to do all these drones and have to do all this like Foley and capture and stuff in nature, and so I kind of like that aspect of the horror genre.
Yeah.
I personally like massive multiplayer online games because they're usually much more epic. You know, you don't have a lot of the small orchestral pieces. It's big bands, it's full orchestras.
I usually, if there isn't a bio for the character, I'll ask for a bio. There's 9 times out of 10 there is. Sometimes someone's like, I don't know, but yeah, I'll want like at least a paragraph. I might ask questions. I usually want an image if there isn't one already, because sometimes I start composing before the game's even like, you know, done or developed.
Right.
Very rarely, but yeah, basically I need words and an image of some kind.
Right.
It breaks down to the actual character themselves. You know, are they male? Are they female? Are they going to be the good shining angel? Are we going to have the evilest villain? Are we going to split the difference somewhere to like a chaotic neutral character?
It would definitely depend. Yeah, 'cause, an example that I look towards is a composer, Austin Wintory, who did the music for Journey. It's an indie game that was really successful, and he has used a blend of larger works or of larger ensembles and smaller ensembles to like really great effect, where you know, they actually got recorded, and that was really cool. If somebody said, hey, we don't have a game in mind, but what would you like to write? I would say large orchestra. But yeah, it would definitely depend on what the game is first and foremost.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So, answering that question is what I would do if they asked.
Both. I think large orchestral music is a little easier, just because like you can kind of fill out the sound, and you know you can kind of drive it home in a way. Like you can kind of drive your point like with a hammer.
Right.
Like smaller chamber music, like there's a lot more nuance to it, and it can be kind of tricky, especially if you're working completely digitally. Like if you don't have any performers to record, like it can be really tricky to fake the funk in that way, you know, because you have a lot of solo instruments and it's very expressive and stuff. So a lot of times if I can't record any players, I will at least try to record a few of the parts myself, because if you can have like 70% digital and like 30% real, or maybe even like 50% real, you can usually kind of, you know, you can usually fake it. You can usually kind of create the atmosphere you want. Because, yeah, it seems like with the smaller or the solo instruments, the more expressive stuff, if it's all digital, it just kind of doesn't work.
Right,
I don't think anyway. But
it really varies on the type of games. Like I said before, if it's a game like Halo or something, it's going to be vastly different than if it's like even a smaller game, let's say, you know, even Minecraft or something. Personally, I like larger orchestral, but it breaks down to the game itself.
It usually goes a lot faster. The deadlines are a lot quicker, depending. With video game stuff, I'm writing a lot more themes, and of course, like you can't really write full orchestrations for video games or full compositions, because like it just kind of gets in the way, like it gets too busy. So stuff has to really kind of make space for everything that goes into the art of video game making, like all the visuals, like all the interaction, all the sound effects. So you really kind of have to step back a lot, it seems like, and like purposely make it a little more ambient and pick your moments. Which film is kind of the same way, but kind of different. You know, there's long stretches of film where you're really kind of carrying it with the music. You know, I feel like with video games, you're not really carrying, you know, the narrative or carrying the game itself too often. Plus, it seems like with films, like you write a theme and you just like play the theme over and over and over and over again. You know, with video games, it seems like I'm usually writing like many themes. Usually all the characters have themes and different environments have different themes. So, I mean, just a little bit more so than with film.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference would be that film is a set medium, and you've got, you know, what you write is what you're going to hear every time, in the same place, in the same way.
Right.
And in video games, more and more often, you're getting these emergent soundtracks that kind of either grow as the player grows or grows as the action unfolds. It's layered differently each time. It comes in a different order depending on what you're doing, and that's one thing that's really interesting about games, is that you can write pieces of a larger work, and then just have it like pieced together as depending on what the player is doing, which is really cool. But what I like about film also is what you see is what you get when you're writing and when you're viewing it. You know, things that are, you know, that trigger something emotionally for you the first time will likely do that every single time the same way. You know, you're gonna hear that piece and you're gonna be like, oh, that's what was happening right then.
Right.
And with video game music, it's other than like RPGs and stuff like that, there generally aren't quite as memorable, in my opinion. which that's fine. It's meant to be background music. There's different psychology involved in helping a player get in the mood to do something versus an audience member that's just sitting there taking everything in.
Right.
Your brain's working differently. So yeah,
I like
it's.
that one.
Just a lot of research, a lot of thinking. I usually kind of create a playlist when I go into a project, and I listen to that playlist like nonstop beforehand for like, however much time I have before I have to start to work. I'll just kind of sort of try to put my head into that world as best as I can. Usually I'll do quite a bit of composing that doesn't really make it into the project, but it's just kind of there, like a lot of stuff, a lot of failed tries and failed experiments until I kind of get it right. And then hopefully by the time I start working, I sort of have an idea what I'm doing.
I think it's exploding.
I think it's growing.
Oh, it's absolutely booming. You have new video games coming out every week. The film scores are only getting bigger. They're up to the size of a movie. So where movies have, 3 years to make a score, we have, maybe a year now to turn around a score. So it's booming. Mm-hmm.